Okay, a very good morning. Today we're going to discuss on the diseases of the respiratory tract. So this is basically the anatomy to show you the respiratory tract. Okay, gas exchange, whereby it exchanges the oxygen and carbon dioxide which is present in the blood. That is the exchange of both these the vital parts, especially regarding oxygen, that is usually done in the lungs. So the infections pertaining to the respiratory tract infection is basically otherwise you can classify it as into upper respiratory tract infections and the lower respiratory tract infections. So the upper respiratory tract infection is a very common sight. In fact, if you see most of the infections which are prevalent worldwide, most of the infections are pertaining to the upper respiratory tract. So this is again just a diagrammatic representation of the anatomy of the respiratory tract, where you can classify them as pertaining to the upper respiratory and the lower respiratory. So anything which involves the nasal cavity, a part of the pharynx and the larynx, that you can call it as upper respiratory tract. Respiratory tract, trachea, primary bronchioles, and the lungs. This encompasses the lower respiratory tract. Now, pharyngitis, this is basically a very common form of infection. So, this is just an inflammation of the throat or the pharynx. And I think we always use the term sore throat. So, this is a layman's term which we can call, but acute pharyngitis can result in very large tonsils which can cause trouble swallowing and difficulty. And in some cases, you can have the pharyngitis which may be accompanied with cough or fever. So most cases of the pharyngitis are usually because of viral etiology. As much as 40 to 60% of the cases of pharyngitis are because of viral etiology. The remaining causes of the pharyngitis can be because of bacterial infections or fungal, or sometimes because of pollution, or maybe because of chemical substances. So this is basically to show you that when you talk about pharyngitis, you have a lot of etiological agents which can cause pharyngitis. Now, streptococcal infection. This is again a very common form of infection which is caused by group A beta hemolytic streptococcus, predominantly what we call as streptococcus pyogenes. Most of you would have, if you're trying to, if you want to recollect your bacteriology, we always say that the most common infection of streptococcus pyogenes is usually pharyngitis. So this is where the when you talk about respiratory infections pertaining to pharyngitis, you have streptococcus pyogenes, which is the predominant factor. And again, just to recollect or just to go back, when you talk about streptococcus pyogenes, we know that this organism is a bacteria, it's a gram-positive bacteria. It has got a lot of virulence factors, and some of these virulence factors, as indicated here, you can see that it has got some enzymes, streptokinase, streptolysin, which has got variable features, outcome or manifestations in the body, whereby a patient can land up with pharyngitis. So this is a picture, as you can see here. You can see the whole pharynx is totally inflamed, red in color. And sometimes this is the picture, you will see that it has got these are exudates, these are pus which can happen in case of the pharyngitis, which might be because of streptococcus pyogenes. So a person, when he or she presents to you, they will always say that I have trouble swallowing food, and then and they might complain of enlarged glands. There'll be swelling in the glands, and when you do an examination, you will find that the tonsils are highly inflamed. And you might have, as I have shown in the previous slide, that you might have the white structure with the white features, which are saying they are basically specks of pus in the tonsils. Okay, and they might also have a form of a membrane. Then along with that, you might have non-specific symptoms, where a person might complain of fever, pain, and sometimes loss of appetite. So these are non-specific signs and symptoms. But by and large, if a person presents to you with pharyngitis, most of the time they will just complain to you with uneasiness, difficulty in swallowing. And when you look at the throat, you will find that it's highly inflamed, and you might be able to visualize the exudates or the pus formation in the tonsils. So for diagnosis, you have to take a throat swab, and as you know that culture is one of the modalities where you can diagnose this infection. Here you can see here, this is a blood agar plate, and you can, as to just for your recollection, you can see that these are basically the beta hemolysis which we see in case of Streptococcus pyogenes. This is again one of the Streptococcus which shows beta hemolysis. So this is a very characteristic presentation of beta hemolysis which you observe in case of Streptococcus pyogenes. Now, along with this, because this is a test which sometimes requires some duration where you have to incubate the plates. So you have rapid tests where you can directly diagnose the causative agent using the antigen detection method in the form of latex agglutination. So those are some of the modalities where you can diagnose the streptococcal pharyngitis by the help. Either you go for culture or you can go for latex agglutination. So this is the morphology where you can go for morphology of Streptococcus pyogenes. You can see they are basically very long chains, which is characteristic of Streptococcus species. So most of the time, the modality of treatment is you can go for penicillin, but again, if you look at this table, you can see that there are other modalities where you can treat patients, especially if they're sensitive to penicillin. So you can go for clindamycin or amoxiclav for treatment of these cases. Now, we know that Streptococcus pyogenes, in spite of causing a primary infection, that is Streptococcus pharyngitis, there are a lot of sequelae. If you remember, if you try to recollect the non-suppurative sequelae of Streptococcus pyogenes, I think we have already told you that it has got some sequelae which a person who has been infected with this infection might land up with these sequelae, which means they can occur after a period where a person has had the infection of pharyngitis. So those kind of patients can land up with acute rheumatic fever or acute glomerulonephritis. So these are some of the non-suppurative sequelae of Streptococcus pyogenes. Acute epiglottitis. This is again another infection where inflammation of the throat, where it leads to abrupt blockage of the upper airway, and then it can cause death in the patient, because if a person is not able to breathe, then you know that the person can go into stridor, and then person will not be able to breathe. So the outcome might not be favorable. I think most of you know about the function of the epiglottis. So this is the infection which again can be caused by many of the bacterial agents. Now coming to rheumatic fever, this is basically an infection which can result because of pre-exposure to Streptococcus pyogenes. And the reason why a person who has been infected with Streptococcus pyogenes lands up with rheumatic fever because of antibody cross-reactivity. I think if you remember, we have a term which you call as molecular mimicry. So this is what happens actually when we talk about rheumatic fever in a person who has recovered from a case of acute streptococcal pharyngitis. So these patients usually, so this infection usually lands up, is commonly seen in children between ages of 5 and 15, and most of them might present with carditis, or sometimes they might manifest as congestive heart failure. Again, acute glomerulonephritis. This is the classical symptoms here you will see is fluid retention, periorbital edema. So these are some of the signs and symptoms which will tell you a person is having acute glomerulonephritis. Again here, if you have such kind of cases, you always have to look retrospectively and find out whether the person has had exposure, has been diagnosed to have streptococcal infection. And it has been observed that when you talk about streptococcal pyogenes, though I've mentioned here that it can cause pharyngitis, but you also know that streptococcal pyogenes can also cause skin infections. So skin infections, a person who has streptococcal infection, where the manifestations can either be pharyngitis or maybe they can have skin lesions, the outcome might be different, because some of them might progress to rheumatic fever, some of them might progress to acute glomerulonephritis. Here what you can actually do is you might have to do an ASLO test, where you can look for the anti-streptolysin O titer, because we know that streptolysin is an antigen which is excreted by the bacteria. So when you look for the ASLO, we're looking for antibodies directed against this particular antigen. That might give you a clue whether the glomerulonephritis is because of the streptococcal infection, because there are other causes of acute glomerulonephritis. So if you want to rule out the causes, to narrow down your diagnosis, you have to do an ASO. At least you will be able to look at the titers and come to some form of diagnosis. Otitis media. This is again another common infection where the infection usually occurs because of infection of the nose or the throat. You know that the eustachian tube opens in the throat. So whenever there's infection or inflammation in the throat, this invariably sometimes can lead to infection of the ear, where you have otitis media. So this is most frequently seen in children, in children, and particularly in children less than 3 years. Diphtheria, this, as you know, is a vaccine preventable disease which is caused by the bacteria which we call as Corynebacterium diphtheria. And diphtheria is one disease which affects the tonsils, the throat, nose, or the skin. And it has been observed that this is a disease which is very common, where the people live in crowded conditions. So because this is a vaccine preventable disease, I think in your immunization program you will see that we have something which you call as DPT. So DPT is basically a vaccine where you give for children less than 5 years. That is diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. So this is because we want to prevent the children from having diphtheria, because diphtheria, as it is very is quite a dangerous disease, because the outcome is most of the time not very favorable. So this is the bacteria. If you remember, this is just to go back to your bacteriology. This is a cuneiform bacteria which is gram positive. You can say it's gram positive variable. But most of the time when you have to diagnose cases of diphtheria, we always do something special staining which we call as the Albert stain. So Albert stain, you will be able to observe the metachromatic granules along with the green bacilli, as you see. This is a picture basically which shows you this is a cuneiform shape. The bacteria is usually arranged in L or V shapes, or what we call as cuneiform. And these enlarged form of in the form morphology of the bacteria is basically the metachromatic granules. So this is a very classical picture which we see in case of Corynebacterium diphtheria. But again, here you also have to remember that there are other non-infectious Corynebacterium diphtheria which we call as diphtheroids. Now diphtheroids also are part of the normal flora, so you have to differentiate between diphtheria and diphtheroids. This is very important for you to remember when you think of diphtheria, because you have to consider the features which is very consistent with Corynebacterium diphtheria, where you can see the metachromatic granules and showing these other types of morphology. So this is just a picture which shows you that is a bull's neck. Person is having this form of swelling in the neck. And now this is another form of diphtheria which most of us, I think, are not very familiar. When you talk of diphtheria, we always always associate diphtheria with the infection of the respiratory tract. But you can also have an entity which we call as cutaneous diphtheria. So here you can have the ulcer which is usually seen in the skin. So this is another very uncommon entity which you can observe in cases of diphtheria. So if you have cases of ulcers which you see here, you also have to consider diphtheria, especially when you take the history that a person has not been immunized. So he might be a potential case where he might land up with these form of ulcers. So for the signs, the symptoms, usually a person will present you with fever, headaches, or throat tiredness, and very very characteristically here in case of diphtheria, you will have something which you call as the pseudomembrane. Now, this is a picture of the pseudomembrane, which usually coating the throat, sometimes the tonsils, and it is sometimes because of the formation of the pseudomembrane, a person or a child who comes to the hospital will land with stridor, because the formation of the membrane is so much that it blocks the respiratory tract. So, a child, if he or she is not immunized, they might land up with stridor in the casualty. And when you look at the throat, you will find that there's the formation of the pseudomembrane. So this is classically the picture of what you will see in case of diphtheria. Now you know that diphtheria is basically a toxin-mediated bacteria. So as you know that the bacteria is basically it has a phage, is a phage-mediated toxin, whereby you can actually render the organism non-toxigenic if you are able to remove the phage. So this is just a picture to show you that the various stages of the formation of the pseudomembrane. Sometimes the patient will not even be able to open the mouth, and the pseudomembrane can cause breathing problems and difficulty in swallowing. So for prevention, as you know that we have DPT. This is a vaccine which is already there in your immunization program. So DPT is usually given for prevention of diphtheria. And the immunization schedule, as we know, is usually 2, 4, and 6 months of age, and booster doses has to be given after the completion of the third doses. Now coming to the infections of the lower respiratory tract, here we have something which you call as pneumonia. Can have whooping cough, we can have tuberculosis. See, these are some of the most common presentations of infections when you talk about the lower respiratory tract. Now, pneumonia is basically inflammation of the lungs with accompanying fluid buildup. And most of the time, it has been observed that pneumonia per se is again caused by, most of the time, is caused by viruses. We have an organism which we call as Streptococcus pneumoniae. This is a bacteria which is a diplococci, gram-positive diplococci, and this contributes to about 90% of all the bacterial causes of pneumonia. Because we have other bacteria which can cause pneumonia, but if you talk about pneumonia pertaining to bacterial causes, then the predominant etiological agent among the bacteria which can cause pneumonia is Streptococcus pneumoniae. So this is a gram-positive diplococci, and it's highly capsulated. And if you look at this picture, if you can see, this is this is a blood agar which shows very mucoid colonies. This is because the bacteria is a capsulated organism, and as you know that the capsule of a bacteria is one of the predominant virulence factor of this organism. So sometimes you might have, because of abundance production of the polysaccharide, which is the integral component of the capsule. So this is what you see sometimes in case of Streptococcus pneumoniae, you can have the colonies of the bacteria showing very mucoid colonies. So this basically just tells you that this bacteria is highly mucoid, which means that it has got a capsule with very high concentration of the polysaccharides. So the colony of the bacteria, unlike in case of Streptococcus pyogenes, you can see it causes alpha hemolysis. And again, here you please have to remember that you have to differentiate between Streptococcus pneumoniae and viridans streptococci. Now, Streptococcus viridans is again a novel flora of the upper respiratory tract. So you have to differentiate between Streptococcus pneumoniae and Streptococcus viridans, because you know one is virulent, one is non-virulent, pertaining to causative agent of pneumonia. This is a picture which this is a form of an India ink. If you remember what is negative staining, So this clearly shows you it delineates the capsule of the bacteria, which you can see surrounding the diplococci. So this is a negative staining, or what you commonly know as the India ink staining. So based on the the capsule of the bacteria, there have been many serotypes of bacteria which has been the serotypes of Streptococcus pneumonia, which has been classified based on the capsular antigens. So this is a picture which you commonly see in case of if you have a person who's having pneumonia, and if you take a sample and then you will see these are the bacteria, a lot of inflammatory cells, a gram-positive cocci, which are diplococci. Okay, some of them might also appear as short chains, but not very long chains, as what you see in case of Streptococcus pyogenes, or what you see in case of Streptococcus viridans. So most of the time, you have some patients who are more susceptible to pneumonia by Streptococcus pneumonia, and most of them usually, as mentioned here, alcoholics, because alcoholics, once they might go into a form of aspiration. So aspiration, as you know, that this bacteria, again, though I've mentioned here that it is a causative agent of pneumonia, but in some individuals this bacteria can also be a normal flora of the throat. So in those individuals, if they aspirate aspirate because of aspirate the fluid to which is aspiration occurs, then they can land up with infection because of this organism. And then patients are immunocompromised. So these are again some of the individuals who are prone to getting infections because of Streptococcus pneumonia. So this is what I was telling you now. This is alpha hemolysis, what we see in case of Streptococcus pneumoniae. Now just to go back little on your bacteriology, now to differentiate between Streptococcus viridans and Streptococcus pneumonia, because I mentioned that Streptococcus viridans is a normal upper respiratory tract flora. So you have to differentiate, because morphologically, if you look at the culture plate, they will always look the same. Both of the isolates will show alpha hemolysis. To differentiate between them, you can easily do a test which you call as optogen. You will find this is a disc which we use. So if you put a disc in the blood agar, you will find that in case of Streptococcus pneumoniae, this organism is sensitive to optogen. So you will see a clearing which is very characteristic, seen in case of Streptococcus pneumonia, but you will not observe these in case of Streptococcus viridans. Now there are other causes of pneumonia, as I've already mentioned. Predominantly I've mentioned about Streptococcus pneumoniae, but besides that there are other etiological agents which can cause pneumonia. You can have gram-negative bacteria, then you can also have Haemophilus influenza, which is again a gram-negative bacteria. You can have atypical agents which can cause pneumonia, such as Mycoplasma pneumoniae. Now, Mycoplasma pneumoniae is again a cell-deficient bacteria. So, when you talk about pneumonia per se, it is not only a specific agent which can cause pneumonia, because you also have viruses, you have bacteria, and among the viruses also you have a range of bacteria which can cause pneumonia. As well as when you talk about bacteria, you can also have a plethora of bacterial agents which can cause pneumonia. So with bacterial agents, you do not have much problem, because if you're thinking about bacterial agents, easily you can just take a sample and then send it to the lab for diagnosis. With viral pneumonias, you have to be much more cautious. Now this is a disease which you call as Legionnaires' disease or legionellosis. This is not very common here. Okay. Again here this disease is again a form of pneumonia, and most of the time the cause of the infection has been found to be contaminated waters, especially when you talk about the air conditioning, where the water can be stagnant, and then this bacteria can multiply in the bacteria. So if the air conditioning is highly effective, then if the filters are not very efficient, then what happens is the water which actually is used to circulate the air inside the ICUs, or maybe in the hot in any enclosed space, that can lead to the infection which you call as legionellosis. So this is how we can diagnose. We can easily detect the bacteria. Depending if a person is having pneumonia, then we can easily diagnose the infection. But this is not a very, it's not a classical bacteria which can be easily diagnosed in the lab. You have to have some special form of media for diagnosis of Legionella. Now, pneumocystis pneumonia. This is again another one of the common fungal agent, which this which is known to cause atypical pneumonia. Uh, Initially, the name, as I've already mentioned, that I think most of us are familiar with Pneumocystis carinii, but I think the name has been changed to Pneumocystis cerevisiae. So this is one of the common opportunistic infections, which is classically seen in case of patients who are immunocompromised, especially in patients who are having AIDS. Pertussis. This is an agent which Bordetella pertussis. This is a bacterial agent which causes whooping cough. Now that's why this is again one of the this is one of the infections which is vaccine prevented. So that's why we have DPT. DPT again, as I've mentioned, that basically stands for diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. So this is a bacterial infection which causes whooping cough and is vaccine prevented by adopting the vaccination universal immunization program. Mycobacterium tuberculosis. This is one of the oldest bacteria which we are still struggling now to contain this infection, and we know that Mycobacterium tuberculosis is again one of the hardest bacteria to actually destroy. So it can cause chronic infection of the lower respiratory tract, and these are some of the signs and symptoms. A patient who presents with pulmonary, this I'm talking about pulmonary tuberculosis, they can present with low-grade fever, chronic cough, tiredness, night sweats. So these are some of the signs and symptoms which you see in case of pulmonary tuberculosis. But we know that Mycobacterium tuberculosis can also cause other extrapulmonary infections pertaining to the bones, the CNS, kidneys, gastrointestinal tract. So the infection pertaining to this bacteria, because this is respiratory tract, we will restrict ourselves to the respiratory tract. So it's the second largest infectious disease killer in the world. So this is how the bacteria usually occurs. It usually affects the lungs. So you can have the infection where you can have active stages and inactive stages. So for diagnosis of this infection, as you know, most of the time we take a sputum sample. I think most of you are familiar with the RNTCP modality of sample collection, where you have to collect two samples, that is the early morning and the spot sample. And what we do with the sample is we do a Zeal-Nielsen staining, and we look for the acid fast bacilli. So this is a picture showing you the Zeal-Nielsen staining, where you're able to observe the acid fast bacilli. So that is a very simple test where you can easily diagnose cases of pulmonary tuberculosis. But this does not hold true if you're talking about extrapulmonary tuberculosis. So for extrapulmonary tuberculosis, you have to send the relevant clinical samples. Then we have something which is called as PPT. This is basically, we would have heard about Montus test. This basically is a test which shows whether a person has been exposed to the bacteria or not, and the body is able to mount an immune response. We have BCG. This is the vaccine which has been given against tuberculosis. So BCG is a vaccine which has been there, which basically is a vaccine which shows that you can actually use this vaccine to prevent against infection with tuberculosis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So for treatment, I think I will not go into treatment of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. I will not go again into the treatment of, or even for the diagnosis of tuberculosis, because I think you have been exhaustively taught about Mycobacterium tuberculosis regarding resistance of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. How do you go about detection of resistance of Mycobacterium tuberculosis? Because this is a very important topic. This is a very important chapter. You will still come across cases of Mycobacterium, cases of tuberculosis, in spite of the bacteria being there since ages. It is one of the oldest disease, but we are still struggling with Mycobacterium tuberculosis because of drug resistance. So I will not go into that because I think it has already been told to you. What are the modalities to go for diagnosis of tuberculosis, be it culture, be it the molecular methods, or be it even the simple staining methods. So I will not go into that. But what I would like to impress upon you is that when you're talking about respiratory infections, you also have to consider Mycobacterium tuberculosis as one of the most important cause of respiratory infections in an individual, especially in a developing country like India. Then we have this entity. Now with Mycobacterium tuberculosis, we have something which we call as MDR-TB or XDR-TB. So I think most of you are familiar with these terms of how we come across these terms, that is MDR-TB and XDR-TB. Then you can have the atypical tuberculosis. This is another entity of which we encompass as non-tuberculous mycobacteria, or the atypical mycobacteria, or we have the NTM, non-tuberculous mycobacteria. So these are basically the group of bacteria which are not Mycobacterium tuberculosis, but it has been observed that these form of mycobacteria have come up in a very huge way, in a large way, because of lot of subsets of immunocompromised individuals. So you can have MAC complex, that is Mycobacterium avium intercellular complex, where they can cause infections in patients who are immunocompromised. So I think that is all about just in a nutshell to tell you about the diseases of the respiratory system, uh, where you have both the viral agents, you have the bacterial agents, you have the fungal agents, and of course, maybe I have not told about the parasitic agents which can cause respiratory infections like Paragonimus westermani. So if you're talking about respiratory infections, you can make notes where you can classify the agents depending on what is the etiological agent. It can be viral, it can be bacterial, it can be fungal, or it can be parasitic causes. This is again a very important chapter, but what I would like to stress on you is that please read up about Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Is a very important topic. Okay. Though you might know, we're not talking about exam point of view, but we're talking more about if you have to interact patients coming with respiratory infections pertaining to tuberculosis. Along with that, you also have cases where you very frequently you might come across cases of pharyngitis. So you have to be very clear on how you approach a case of a pharyngitis or a case with pneumonia. You have to be very clear on how to approach the diagnosis so that you're able to come to a form of presumptive diagnosis. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.